Hello and welcome to GrassChat. My name is Russ. If you are about to watch this for the first time, we are on, I think it's episode 16 of our GrassChat series. And this one I am really looking forward to. We've been waiting for this for quite a while, and I'm really pleased it's finally happening. We often say that some people have been around and done it all in the sport, but this man truly has. He's seen it all, he's done it all, and he's not ready to give it up yet. He's got plenty more that he wants to do, and we're going to find out about his racing life tonight. Starting, well, we're going to go right back and work our way forward. But I'd like to introduce you to the one and only Mr. Chris Allanson. Chris, good evening. How are you doing?
Good evening. Doing very well, thank you.
Good. Yeah, how's tricks at the moment? Obviously, we're not going to dive too deep into what you've been up to in the sport at the moment with what, because obviously there's been quite a heavy load, but it's looking good at the moment as long as everybody can behave and understand the rules we've got set in place. But you did tell me a month ago Autograss racing will happen, and it's thanks to obviously everybody on the board who was making it achievable.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work behind the scenes. I mean, there's certainly a strong will to go racing this year, and I think everybody just wants to do it. I mean, we're all the same. We're all mad to be racing again. So long may it continue. Hopefully, we'll get there, and it'll be a successful year. It's going to be different, but what can you do? You know, you can only do your best. We've done best bit of planning we can from the NASA board side of things. Things twist and turn every week, really, it looks like. But no, there's been a lot of effort, and I'm quite pleased that we're looking like we're going to get a go again. First meeting, I think, will be Scunthorpe and maybe Radford, so that'll be good. And let's crack on. Yeah,
definitely. I think, in a way, last year with doing these practice meetings, they sort of helped build some foundations of the plannings and the layout and procedures that are going to be put in place. And obviously the early stages is we're going to almost run identically to last year with pre-bookings. Everybody's on a list and all that. So I suppose, despite obviously nobody wanted the last year to go how it did, at least it's helped from that point of view build up on a safe way that we can actually manage these events and go racing.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of lessons learned last year. I mean, obviously I've only just gone on the board, but you've got to try and think of everything, and it's nearly impossible. I mean, it's God's only trust. I'm glad I'm not Boris Johnson. You know, how you deal with this is just a nightmare. But I think the way that they've tackled it and the way that we're proposing to go forward, yes, it'll happen. And we might trip up a bit here and there, but, you know, I think just let's all try. You know, at least if we're trying, it's better than doing nothing. And you know, last year was a stuttering sort of start because we didn't really know what we were dealing with. Nobody did. Not politicians or doctors or anybody. But they're a lot stronger position now to go forward. So, yeah, should be good.
Yeah, I think so. As we say, a lot was learned with how it went last year, and it can certainly lay those foundations down. But yeah, we're all looking forward to going racing. But what we want to do is look back now, because as I say, you really have been there, done it all, seen it all. You've got many T-shirts, so we're gonna dive into this life. Now, first off, I want to know, and it is obviously known that your profession in life was a police officer. You'd gone through the ranks, but I want to know, who gave you the actual plodder nickname?
I think that'd be Grant Victory. I'm pretty sure it was Grant Victory. Grant, God bless him, is the world's comedian. You know, he once sold me a wheel. He sold me a steel wheel, and he wrote on it, sold to Z Cars by Grant Victory, because he wanted his name on the side of the car. That was the only way he could get it on. Felt sick, Ben. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you mind the nickname, or because it stuck, and it obviously you do often get referred to it still nowadays. Some people can obviously take a bit of offence to it, but it didn't matter to you, did it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny actually, because when I was 20, when I started racing, I'd only just been a policeman a few months. My first season, I actually raced a banger. I raced an old 122S Volvo banger at Scarborough on the banger track, and watched these specials and things went round. And then that winter, a bloke came into my mate's garage at Staxton. He had an old Lancia Beta Coupe. It had failed the MOT. It had 4 brand new tyres on it, a full tank of petrol in it. It had failed. This bloke was gutted. So he came in and he said, I'm pissed right off because this thing's failed the MOT. I said, well, I'll buy it off you. I'll give you 40 quid for it. So I gave him 40 quid for it, sold the tyres for 40 quid. So I ended up with an engine and a gearbox and all the suspension off the front. So I literally dropped it out of the car, sat it on the floor, and I made a frame. I got some Volkswagen Beetle front suspension, complete, and made a special. And that's how I started in Class 9, literally with 40 quid, which I've got back. It cost me nothing, really.
Well,
and I had a fantastic, first season, it was hilarious, so, yeah. And that's what I started with it.
Yeah, so you started actually banger racing, which was very popular, and it still is. But did you mind it, the contact sport? Did it bother you at all, or was it just? I know you just started in this fairly stressful life of what a police officer is about, but was discovering this cheap form of motorsport sort of your breakaway to relax from the job? And is that why it intrigued you?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually riding police motorbikes at the time. I was on the police motorbike around Brid Town. So Bridlington had its own motorbike for the town. Not traffic, it was just the town bike, which was a huge, huge advantage. You go down the footpaths, catch people, it was brilliant. And so I was riding that. And I used to go all over. I mean, I worked 24/7 on the bike. It didn't matter what the weather was, I was out on the motorbike. But it was such a weapon because you could get to everything first. Yeah. Nothing stopped you. I remember once we had an armed robbery on the Jewellers up the promenade, and I'm coming round what I used to call Fish and Chip Corner. At the bottom there's a fish and chip shop, and the corner was always greasy because people, when they're pissed, dropped chips all over the floor. And you couldn't go around that corner fast. You were on your ass. So I went gingerly around that, but I had the blues and twos going, and I'm going up the promenade at Brid at 70 mile an hour, and there's an old bloke crossing the street. And as I'm going towards him, he saw me coming, and I'm aiming to go in front of him, and he stopped, and then he took a step forward, so I aimed to go behind him, and he took a step back. Shit, the closing street, like 70. Anyway, I managed to miss him, get to this job. We ended up locking these lads up, but that's another story. But I mean, I loved it. It was a brilliant job as a policeman, and I used to do a lot of off-road motorbiking. So I'd actually been racing and sort of trials riding and things off-road before. And I actually, I had a mate at Staxton Garage, and he had a 23-year-old Volvo 122S car parked up with no engine in it. And near it was a 25-year-old engine. And I said, I fancy having a go at that banger racing. He said, well, there's an engine there and there's a car there. Let's make one. So we made this car. And we thought we'll make it come out the grid a bit quicker. So we got an old Hessian wheat sack and filled it full of sand and tied the neck up real tight, threw it in the boot and welded the boot shut. Ballast. You're not supposed to have ballast. It says in the rules, no ballast allowed. Yeah. Anyway, so I go to a race meeting, and one of the local lads thought he'd have a bit of fun and tipped me over, so he rolled me. He rolled over the track 2 or 3 times. And when I came crawling out of the car, I looked out at the corner of my eye, and I saw this wheat sack, and it had ripped all the boot lid off. I mean, it was proper welded shut, this boot lid. And it's laid there, and this marshal paddled over to it and kicked it with his foot, and his foot just stopped dead. So, and he said, is that out your car? And I said, I've never seen it before in my life, mate. Well, that broke his foot. Oh, dear. So, yeah, so I had a baptism of fire with the banger, but I only lasted 1 season with the banger. I wanted to be racing something faster. And consequently, I built this Lancia-powered 2-litre, which, to be fair, it was transverse. And everything was north-south in those days with like 4-link suspension. So it was upright. Mine had a pair of struts, a bit like a Junior Specialist now. It was literally the struts, the subframe, everything just dropped into the back of the car. So it was dead simple. And it went really, really well because it was quick out of the grid. So although there was quicker cars there, the lad Y8NY, Illingworth, Illingworth, is it? Illingsworth, 8, class 9, and Norman Kidd, they were there. First meeting with Norman Kidd, I got shot out of the grid and going around anyway. He come past me at one point, and I get back at him, and I clipped his back wheel, rode up, straight over the roof, down the front of the car, never backed off, because you don't when you're 20, do you? You're as mad as a hatter. Flew over the roof, and off we went. Anyway, finished the race, and Norman never swore. One of life's gentlemen, absolute cracking bloke. And he walked up, lovely fella, and he said, excuse me, he said. I said, what's up, mate? He said, you overtook me, but you went right over my roof. I said, oh, was that you? I said, oh, sorry, mate. He said, no, come and have a look at my car. And there was a black tyre mark up his back bar, over the roof and down the other side. And he said, it's a funny way to overtake you, though, is that. But we became best of mates, absolute firm friend. You know, some people would have been fighting in the pits, but we were laughing about it, you know. And the camaraderie in them days was phenomenal. You know, you've got to say that some of the characters that was around in them days, some of the things that they used to get up to, and that just the leg pulling and bits of sort of daft things we used to get up to, they were great. But I know Norman, God rest him, he's dead now, but he was a hell of an engineer. And I learned so much off him. You know, he was a bit like a surrogate dad to me. And he'd say, I'd go to him with an idea and he'd say, well, have you thought about this and have you thought about that? And he knew everything. He knew about hydraulics, he knew about electrics. If he didn't know, he would find out. So he was like a bit of a mentor for me. So you spend hours and hours with him in his shed, watching him with his lathe and messing about, you know, just big thing, this sport, for not just the sport, sort of for the people you meet and who are probably instrumental in your life and how they develop you on. You know, it's not just about racing. I believe firmly that I wouldn't be the bloke I am today without grass tracking. Definitely not. You know, but yeah, early days of Scarborough, you know.
Well, I just want to actually make this point. At this time, you was in your very early career of being the man upholding the law, and then you went motor racing to break the rules and the law of the sport by filling the car with ballast.
Well, you know, God bless me with the talent of being able to read and write. I read a rule book, I look at it, and I think, you know what? We can get into this and we can get into that, and let's do this and let's do that, you know. But, I won't say I necessarily break the rules. I think if you talk to McLaren and Ferrari and everybody, they read the rule book and they look at everything where they can get an advantage. So it's about an advantage, isn't it, really, to be fair?
In some cases, it's about finding that loophole where, well, it says about you can do this or you can't do this, but it doesn't say you can or can't do this. And in a way, your involvement in the sport, and you have helped the sport evolve over the years, which we are going to talk about. It's sort of finding those loopholes which helps the sport progress, because it actually helps the rule book develop and the general rules overall. But you've actually covered quite a few of the bits which I didn't have written down. So, you built this first class 9. So, how did you actually look at any of the other cars that were there that day to sort of get the idea of how you want to build yours, or did you just see them racing around and thought, well, I've got these bits and all this gear, I'm going to do it my own way? So from day one, you practically did it your own way.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't buy anything if I could help it. I had no money. I mean, in them days, I don't think anybody had any money. In fact, the first car I built was made out of bedstead angle iron welded together down the length of it. I actually got some from the scrapyard for free, and it was 2 inches by 2 inches angle, so I welded it down the length of it, and I laid that underneath the subframe from the Lancia forwards. I sat on the floor and thought, well, that's where my bum's going to be. I got the front suspension off the Volkswagen Beetle, fastened that on, welded it up, put the steering shaft down with a little chain and sprockets. Oh, now there's a tale for you. Chain and sprockets. Jesus Christ, man, what a dangerous rig that was. So I'm racing one day at Scarborough, and I chuck it into the top corner, the first bend. And as you know, it's steep and it's sloped downhill there. And as I threw it in, the steering bust. The steering bust, and my brakes failed at the same time.
Ooh.
So I went nose into the fence. Didn't hurt myself, didn't do any damage, but and it's a funny feeling when you can't steer and you can't stop.
Yeah.
No, the handbrake. Oh, yeah.
Just touching up on Scarborough in the early days, I mean, the venue, I don't know how old the venue actually is, but it's been around for donkey's years. But you obviously started racing when it still pretty much looked like a quarry. What was it like with that extra feature? You know, where the pits actually is now was the quarry bed, and there was sort of an island on the infield. What was that like? Just going into a blind corner like that and not knowing what's on the inside.
It was massively longer. I mean, the track was a hell of a lot longer. In fact, there's a steel pipe in the pits next to the telegraph pole in the pits. And if you go and look, that steel pipe's got to stay there. It's something to do with the Environment Agency. And the track used to go around the back of that. That was on the infield. Well, when you look, it's another 40 or 50 yards longer. And you used to come into the sort of where the pits are now, and then up and round and over the jump, quite a steep jump, and it was a very narrow gap. It was probably only 2 cars wide. That bulldozed through the hill that was there and just made it as level as they could. I mean, it was a bit rough and ready, in fairness, because it was chalk and really shaly and abrasive. But, God, it was good fun racing there. We used to put 30 cars on the track. We used to have a reverse direction race, with 30 cars in. Christ almighty, there was a completely different atmosphere to it now, and I think we've lost something with having just pure class racing, because if you go somewhere and there's only 4 of you in the bloody race, whereas if you go somewhere and there's 4 of you in this class and there's 4 in front of you in the next class and 4 in front of that, there's 12 of you on the track, so from the back you've got to work like hell to come through. York used to do the same thing. I mean, York, when Baz Tinker ran York, Martin's dad, he used to run it, and they used to have, I don't know whether it was 30 or 25 to line, but I remember once when I had my big Chevy powered class 10, I was there, and we set off at the very back on the start line. Halfway down the start straight was some class 3s, and then round the first bend was some class 1s. And as we come into the first corner, I'd caught these 3s up, and there were 5 or 6 abreast. And I remember there was 2 on the inside and a gap in the middle, and the lad in the middle was in front. So I snuck into the gap behind him, and as he drifted wide, I sort of went alongside him up the inside. And as I popped out from behind him, there was a class 1 just there. And I collected him on the front of the head, pushed him the full length of the straight. And when I just backed off at the end, turned under him and off I went. When I come into the pit afterwards, he come over to me and he was shaking. He says, Jesus Christ, he said, I just got this little nudge from behind, and all of a sudden, bang, I'm off. Because the old Chevy could push. He'd never had as fast a lap in his time. But yeah, he was chuffed to bits with it, was that lad, yeah. But they were brutal races because you were on it. You get to, it's like a champion of champions race almost, but every week. And I used to like them because you're attacking all the time. It's all right, but if you've got a fast car and you get into the lead, there's sort of nothing for you. You just got to be tidy and careful, whereas if there's somebody there in a class 2 and it takes you a lap to catch them and then half a lap to get past them, it's a race, isn't it? So, yeah. I've grown, when I've grown up over it, I wanted to get the class racing out of the way because I wanted to do the opens at the end of the day. And as soon as I was in the senior racing, that's all I did. I was rubbish in the class race, and I never did anything. But I got more of a buzz, especially when I went into class 2, because then you've got a target of sometimes there was a full straight width of class 1s to catch, but then you've got the faster cars catching you. And I loved it even more when I had the class 9 because I knew I was starting right at the back, and I've got to catch all these other cars up. And sometimes you did, and sometimes you didn't by the checkered flag. But
back to you anyway. So right back almost to the beginning. You had a few years with the little Class 9, but you wanted more power, and I suppose the adrenaline of, as you mentioned, about on your job on the bike and doing the bike, I suppose the craving for speed and going faster and more power was needed, and you would soon move into Class 10. And Class 10 was a beautiful thing back in the 80s and the early 90s, because every car out there was different. Yeah. Like, people didn't have, there wasn't, every chassis looked different. They were all coloured different. They none looked the same, but they also had different engines. Like, they would use Chevys, they would use Ford V6s. You went down the route originally of a Chrysler. So how did that come about of getting hold of a Chrysler engine for this? And I think your Class 10s were, or I'm not sure which one, but it was nicknamed Thunderbolt.
Yeah,
was that the Chrysler car?
Yeah, that was Chrysler car. The Chrysler story starts off, I mean, a mate of mine had a Chrysler engine in bits. And it was all there, but it was in bits. And he said, "Do you want to buy it?" And I gave him 50 quid for it. And then I set on and put it together. And I built this car around this engine. And when I started it, when I first started it, I put new pistons in it, rings. I'd gone through it, like put big ends and mains in it, bolted it all together, cranked it over a few times, and I had no water in it. I just literally put oil in, put a crank oil pressure up, got oil pressure up, and obviously the fuel pump was fuel pumping, and I thought, I'll just see if it'll bloody go. And I had the ignition off while I was cranking it, so I literally stopped cranking it, turned the ignition switch on, and it was right on the point of firing, and it started without the starter motor. It had a piston full of mixed fuel, and it sparked and it struck up. I couldn't believe it. So I ran like hell and got the watering can and filled it with water and left it ticking over to warm up. But it used to do that every now and again. You'd go to it in the pits, turn the kill switch on, it would start. It was unbelievable, was that thing. But it only had one carburetor. It had a little 2-barrel carb on it, tiny little carb. And I decided I wanted to make more power out of it. So I got the angle grinder out and cut a big hole in the top of the manifold. And I got 2 D-gas carbs off the old V6 3-litre Capris and Granadas. Got 2 downdraft carbs off them. Took it to Dave Bogg up at West Lutton, who's still alive. He's an absolute character, is Dave Bogg. Brilliant. He always used to be giggling when I came with something, because it was always something a bit different. And we get there on the dyno, we put it on the dyno, and all it would do was smoke the tyres. So he said, "I'll tell you what we'll do." And he got this big lump of wood, like a big plank of wood, put it on the back of the Special, and drove his grey Fergie tractor up onto the back of it to weigh it down. And then it weighed down on the dyno with the tractor. But he loved it, did Dave. Absolutely loved it, and still does. I was up there the other month. He's about 84 now, and he was knelt on the floor with his hand right round the back corner of a vintage Porsche, changing the spark plugs. And he said, "They're a prat to do, these, you know." And he's like 84 years old, still grafting, messing with cars. Brilliant bloke, you know. But yeah, good fun. But yeah, it was a good car, that. And I ran it maybe 3 or 4 years. I ran it up till, I think, the 89 Nationals. I was running it on a Renault 30 gearbox. I was one of the first to run a Renault 30. I did quite a lot of work to it because I kept breaking output shafts. So I used to put them in the lathe. I used to bore a hole in the diff and put it in the lathe with a shaft about probably 14 inches long. And I'd weld a flange on either side of the shaft. And I had to true them up to get my brake discs on. So I would hold one side of the shaft with a gearbox in the lathe, laid in the lathe, spinning it slowly and true the shaft up so it could put a CV joint on it. But because you couldn't put them both on it, the side casings split from either side. But then you had a solid shaft right through the middle of the diff, and they didn't break anymore then.
Yeah.
So, chasing breakages. A big part of grassing in them days was parts that weren't really designed to take the power, like the Mark 9 Hewlands and things. You know, if you had 180 horsepower, you never broke them. If you're 185, you broke them every meeting. if you clipped wheels with somebody, you broke the gearbox. So you have to be careful not to be clipping wheels and things. So I know Vinnie Gibbons used to break a gearbox nearly every race with his V6. He had a V6 LM170 in them days, was one of the Hereford Bulls. He used to break gearboxes like they're going out of fashion. But they were about in them days, and you could still buy them, and he knew how to take them to bits and modify them for what he wanted. But in fairness, they were just on the raggy edge of being reliable, and that was no good to me. I didn't like being towed off with a tractor. You need to finish races to win, so big thing was sort of making it reliable. So
yeah, and I suppose that is the difficult thing, because as we say, and as you've pointed, every car was unique back then. No, I mean, yes, some people might have started using the same gearbox or eventually the same engine out, but it's not like today where everything is fabricated to fit that car. Well, not just that car, but a whole host of cars. So you go, like, as you will be, you would eventually build cars for customers. They were the same for everybody. That was the option. There may be a few variations, but back in the early days, you had to, if you wanted something to fit, you had to make it fit. And if it worked, it worked. But if it broke, you didn't have another one. You'd have to make something else fit. So it was a lot of trial and error back in the early days.
Yeah, there was. And I mean, I think Jeff Beresford was building a few cars then. Bruce Campbell built one or two. The Hereford Blacksmith built the Hereford Bulls. But I mean, most people were making their own cars. And that's really what appealed to me. And I like making things. And it's, if you build something and you then go out and race it and win in it, there's like a double whammy there, because you've invented it, you've made it, you've won in it. Just a lot of the time people look at what you've done and they don't understand why you've done it. So for me, a lot of the theory and a lot of the things that I've come up with over the years, I've sort of daydreamed a bit and thought, if I tried that might work. And because I've thought about it, I'll go and do it. I'll literally think of an idea and I'll go and try it. In the early days, I couldn't get the Class 10 to turn in. It was a cow. It would not turn in. And I tried everything. I had 2 brake pedals on it at one time. I had one brake pedal that locked all 4 wheels and one brake pedal that only locked the rears. And I could handbrake it into the corner. Literally, I could handbrake into corners. So I'd brake like hell momentarily with all 4 wheels and then slide across the pedal and then back on gas. I mean, crazy. It's like dancing. It's like belly dancing with your feet. But those days went when I had a revelation. I bought a book called How to Make Your Car Handle by Fred Punn and Larry Hofer, 2 Americans. And I read that book from cover to cover. And I can quote you pages of it now. I understood and read it and absorbed it. All about anti-roll bars and geometry and caster and camber. And you start to put some of that into effect. And one of the first things I did was put an anti-roll bar on the back of my Class 10, and suddenly it turned in. Oh, problem solved. I had the power once I got it sliding, but you couldn't get it to slide. And there were animals in them days. I mean, they were like 5 feet longer than they are now. They were huge, great things. I remember chopping a foot off the front of my Class 10, and I went to York, and the first time I went to York, the front wheels, it felt like it was wheeling down the straights. It wasn't, but you could physically feel how much more grip I was getting, how much lighter it was. So I learned, from just experimentation, really. And we went to, you remember Frank Hanley, Roy Hanley's brother?
I recall the name. That's about all.
The Hanleys were a big family. They lived in Farndale when there was maybe 10 or 12 of them. There was a lot in them days. The people had big families. There were farmers. They had no money at all. And my uncle lived at the top of Rosedale. And the two valleys, sort of heads of the valleys, there's a moor that's about a mile long over the top between the two. And my uncle had a donkey for sale. And he would sell Frank Hanley and Roy Hanley this donkey. So they came over, the 4 of them came over, and they would buy this donkey. So they bought this donkey, and this donkey didn't want to go. And they had a halter around its neck trying to pull it. So the 4 Hanley brothers said, bugger this, we'll pick it up, we'll carry it back. and they put 2 stakes, one under its front legs, left to right, one under its back legs, left to right, picked this donkey up and carried it over the moor. These are the characters we used to race with. And they carried this donkey over to their farm, dropped it in the farmyard, and the donkey just looked round, pricked its lugs up and ran back. So that's the whole way pronounced. Oh, God. But they were 2 of the characters. Well, Frank Handley had a grass track circuit that he built at Leeds Bradford Airport. And we turned up, and the briefing consisted of, how big do you want this track to be then? Like, it was just a field. And we all turned up to go racing. But that week, I'd shortened my car by 4 inches. I'd literally chopped it in half and shortened it by 4 inches. And then the week after, I lengthened it by 8 inches just to see what the difference was. And then were the days of early experimentation, you know, where you went places, you just tried it. You just tried it, you know, what works, what doesn't work. And when something works, you put that in your memory bank, and that's a lesson learned, and then you move on. So, yeah, never be frightened to try something new, you know. It's just been my motto, really. But,
yeah. I never expected a story about a donkey. But I suppose that not the donkey, the car experimentation thing. I think that's something that's obviously lost nowadays because myself included, and obviously you were one of the first to make it quite a big business venture from it. But we do now rely on the rest of the world to help us, don't we? So now, if we want a chassis, we know there's a select number of people who will build us one. If we want an engine tuning up, there's a select number of people who will do it. We want suspension, it's here or here. And yeah, that magic has slightly gone with the innovativity of building stuff yourself. There are still some out there who do try it, but the problem is in today's world, it seems, if you build something yourself and it doesn't work, you're not just losing one weekend, you're going to lose half a season, a full season even, and then you've wasted your chance, haven't you? And then by the time you get it right for next year, it could have progressed even further. So I think that's what puts people off nowadays, because obviously there's more meetings with a meaning. No disrespect to obviously the old open meetings, which there were a number of, but now when people focus on BAS UK, qualifying for nationals itself, which takes up majority of the season, it sort of now stops people trying things, I suppose. So you had this class 10. You were prominently still race at home, but you would eventually start to travel around. And I think one of the first major events you went to away was the Map Open, if that's correct. Was that probably your first real test to see how good you was against opposition?
Yeah, I mean, I'd raced some good cars locally. I mean, Barry Glendenning had a hell of a class 10 in them days.
Obviously, Dave Yeardley.
Yeah, I mean, there was some good lads about. You know, Dave Yeardley turned up at a York meeting with his car on the back of a Rolls Royce once. You know, because he had a wedding car, he had a tow bar on, so he fetched it. But I mean, you know, the locals we raced against, yeah, you sort of knew where you were. But I'd been working on the car one sort of Friday, and I said to my missus, "Do you know what? I'm gonna go to that Map Open." "Oh, are you?" I said, "Yeah." And I had a blooming Marina Estate car at the time. It was an absolute wreck.
Wow,
yeah, it was fun. And I said, "I'll just skip in the back of the car, it'll be all right." So off I went. I literally jumped in the car and I got to near Stratford-on-Avon. And I parked in a lay-by and kicked all night. I had a crap night's sleep. When I woke up next morning, I'd been laid all night on the bloody jack handle under the carpet, and it was like anyway, I get up and I went to a news agent's. There's no sat nav in them days. I mean, there's bugger all, you know. A map, that's what we had. And I didn't really know where I was. So I went to this news agent. I said, "I've come racing, where's racecourse?" And she pointed me to racecourse. "Yeah, the bloody horse racecourse, but it's just at the bottom of the hill, isn't it?" Anyway, yeah. I managed to find the track, and it's still in the same place. I mean, it's still the same venue. And I pulled in the field, and the first bloke I saw was Mick Oldby, who'd come on the same whim. Basically, he'd turned around and said to his missus and Andy and John, his lads, "Let's go to Map Open." So they'd kipped in the back of their transit, and I was kipping it back of my van. We had a hell of a weekend. it had poured with rain for 3 or 4 days before, and it was a mud battle of the track. And it was in the top field, not the field where we are now, but the one above, where there's some music for camping. And the class ones went out, and they never got off the line. The back wheels were clogged up with mud. And you know what? That mud's like there. It's just horrendous. So they said, does anybody want to clear the track? Any of the class 10s want to come out and clear the track? Well, I'll have a go at that. So I went and had a full tank of juice. I did like 15 laps. The car was just about starting to boil, and the red flagged me. There's only me had gone out. And I'd hooned around and thrown a bit of mud about. Anyway, they said, oh, you're on. Get yourself on. So I pulled up between Bruce Campbell and Terry Brown, and like, I'm racing them, and I'm proper racing them. You know, I was on them. Yeah. I'm thinking, Christ, I ain't so far off here, because Terry Brown was a legend. I mean, he was just the man. And Bruce Campbell wasn't bloody far behind, you know. So I got in the first heat, I was sort of third to them. And I was there in all the heats with them, and in the final, I came third to them. And I came away and I thought, you know what? I ain't far off here. So we're doing something right. And that sort of sparked us off. So the next weekend, and Mick had a good weekend with his class 7, because obviously he was a top class 7 man anyway. I can't remember which car he had then. It was probably the supercharged Escort, but he was a top bloke. And in fact, when I was on the police motorbike, I'd actually stopped him and Colin Stevenson when I was on the bike, because I wanted to know where they were going. That was before I started racing grass tracking. So they were going up towards the grass track thing, and they were just at the Dotterell pub. And I pulled them in into the lay-by. I said, now then, lads, because it's what you say when you're a police. Now then. And they go, oh, bloody hell, what's he going to do? What's he going to say? I said, where are you going? Oh, we're just going down here, mate, going racing. You know, they're all on tenterhooks. And I'm just like taking the mick, really. Anyway, I got on talking to him. I said, oh, maybe come and have a look. I went and had a look, and then I built a car. So I've known Mick right from the very first sort of knockings of racing. But we became firm friends after the map, because that first map, when we went to it, we had a right weekend. And because we knew each other and we were amongst sort of strangers, if you like, we stuck together. God, I don't know how old Andy would be then. He'd only be 4 or 5, maybe even less. You know, he was only a young lad. But we had a brilliant meeting then. So Mick says, there's an East Anglian Open next week. Shall we go there? So we went down to St Neots. In a stubble field, we went to East Anglian Open. And I won the Champion of Champions on the Saturday. Hey, I was over the moon. And I got a rosette in £5. I was gutted. I was thinking there'll be a big cup for it. Oh, man. Anyway, but we had 2 good days racing. And then from then on, we went to all the big opens. I mean, literally all the big opens. And because there was no Bass, you sort of went to the Open Championships. So we did the West Midland Open, we did the South Wales Open. We went all over. We eventually bought a coach, a big black coach. It was an old makeup wagon for Pinewood Film Studios. And it had a big generator. Yeah, it was rigged for everything you would want in a motorhome. It had electrics everywhere. Down each side was mirrors with lights all the way around them, so that could make all the people up, all the actors up. But it had a big, literally a house-sized boiler in the back, a diesel-fired heater for it. It had electrics everywhere, so we ripped it out, gutted it, made it into a motorhome. My class 10 went in the back. We made some ramps, and the bed tilted up in the back, and the 10 sort of came half in and half out the back of it. And then we towed his 7 on the trailer behind. So one Friday afternoon, we both get a flyer from work, and we're going to South Wales Open. And we get to the M18, where it joins the M1. Yeah. And when you come down the slip road, there's 2 slip roads, and then there's 3 lanes of traffic, and then there's 3 lanes of traffic the other side, and 2 slips off. And as we come along, I'm sat next to Mick at the front of the coach, and he's driving. And he looks in the mirror to filter in, and he said, wheels falling off trailer. Just dead calm. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I went, Christ, this is going to be airy. And this is like 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. There's cars everywhere. And this wheel overtook us. And as it overtook us, it veered towards the central reservation. When it got to the second set of bloody cat's eyes, it hit a cat's eye and started to bounce. And it bounced clean over and into the other lanes and went 5 lanes of traffic at our side, 5 lanes of traffic at other side. By now it's wobbling like a drunk. And there's cars braking and swerving everywhere. And watching it in slow motion, and shit, shit, this can't be happening, it can't be happening. And it fell over and landed on the hard shoulder. I said, stop here. So he stops. I said, I'll go get it. So I stood at the side of the road like a muppet. There's 10 lanes of traffic just going boom, 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 boom. I came back after a minute and said, we'll pick it up on the way home. So then we had to go into Newark. So we go into Newark and I said, let's hire a trailer. Because we wanted to still go racing. We still wanted to go to South Wales. So Mick says, hey, that's a good idea. So we pull into this petrol station and I walk in and this bloke says, now then, Chris, how are you doing? I said, oh, not bad, mate. Are you going the fastest man? They said, yeah, I am, mate, but we're a bit of a problem. Only 3 wheels on our trailer. Do you know anybody who'll hire as a trailer? No, but if you go down there, somebody will. So I go down to the next one. Fella said, now then, Chris, how are you doing? Everybody knew us from Grassing. We ended up at this place, hired a trailer for the weekend, loaded up, got there at midnight, had a cracking weekend's racing, came back home, swapped it all over, and came home on 3 wheels again, literally on 3 wheels again. But, them are the sort of memories and adventures you just, you just remember them, don't you? They're cast in mind, like. Jade and Rick would be, God, they'd be tiny in them days. Jade would maybe be 2 or 3, and Rick would be like just a baby, dead young. But yeah. Well, good times, like, to be fair.
Well, definitely. I found out far more than I expected already. But yeah, this is what this is why I like to do this and try and relive these memories through people and share them as well. I mean, that's just absolutely fantastic. And I suppose, as you say, that's where your friendship with Mick really kicked off after the map opened, despite knowing obviously a little bit before, in unusual circumstances anyway. But I suppose really then, not only did you want to go racing every weekend, but after initially proving to yourself that something that you'd done wasn't far off what the well-known people at the time was. I mean, was you aware of Terry and Bruce at that sort of time, or was?
Yeah. I remember Terry Brown at York Nationals in '84.
Yeah, and
he had the Alpha engine in it. What a thing that was! I mean, that was a serious motor, and it sounded like nothing else. It had a hell of it was a really, really sort of deep, throaty sounding car. I can't remember how he got on at them nationals, but I mean, he was the man to beat. He was national champion ever so many times, champion of champion. He was the one that you had to go and race if you wanted to. And because I'd had a sniff of it, I thought, you know what, I ain't far off here. So I kept playing with the car and getting better and better with the car and learning. It was part of, I suppose it's your apprenticeship when you look back on it, really. And you learn how to set a car up. You learn if there's a problem with the car, how to cure it. So it's a massive task to learn it all. It isn't easy. Modern shock absorbers, Jesus Christ, 3-way shockers. It's just a mystery to most people, and to learn all that is a big task. So when you start by actually building the thing and then you're modifying it and you try and make it faster and better, you end up all the time thinking about it. And it was good for me because, I was a busy boy. I was a detective at the time. So you were busy, you were working hard, you had all sorts of things going on, some of them quite serious cases. But in the meantime, there's something else there. There's something just there that's completely different. There's no stress with it. It's not the same as what the police job was. And so it's funny how you'd be doing something and the answer to the problem for another thing comes to you. So I'd be daydreaming about the racing car and the problem I was trying to solve at work come to me, and vice versa. So you sort of, it is a good combination of two completely different things, which obviously it ended up being a job for me because I left the police and did this. But the apprenticeship years were good, and I look back on them with quite a lot of fondness because if you're a bit of an action man, I like to think of something. If I think of something, I want to do it. I just want to get on and do it, and I crack on and do it. So when I thought about twin engine cars, I just had two engines sat in the workshop. I'd actually talked to Colin Allanson, my cousin, years and years before about building a twin engine car. And he wanted to put 2 V6s in the back of his Beetle Class 7. and they'd have been too heavy and it wouldn't have worked. But I wanted to put 2 Lancia engines in a car, one in the front and one in the back. And the front engine, I was going to use an automatic because they're a bit softer on the power delivery and you'd get rid of some of the understeer. And the rear engine, I wanted to be just a normal conventional gearbox. And it would have been a 4-wheel drive, but you weren't allowed 4-wheel drive. Yeah. So I had sort of played, in my mind, I toyed with 2 engines in a car. And I'd discussed it with Colin at some length, one Christmas do it was. Anyway, I had 2 CBR 1000 Honda, I'm getting off subject a bit, but anyway, 2 CBR 1000 Honda engines in the workshop, destined for 2 Class 8s. And I looked at them and they were side by side, and I just thought, them would fit in back of a 10. Or, well, a 9 as I thought it would be, because it was under 2 litre. And I went into the house, and I came back 15 minutes later, and I knew what I wanted to do. And a week later, I'd made the back end of a 10, or a twin-engine car. And Dave Fielder came through to see me, and he was finding engines for me. And he dropped an engine off, and he said, "What's that?" I said, "I've put 2 engines in the back of this." He said, "Build me one." So I built a Class 7 for his eldest lad, Ben Fielder. And we turned up at Nottingham, first meeting of the year, and it was freezing. It was blowing a hoolie. It was sort of Easter time. And I remember being parked on that bit of a slope in the old, the one near the motorway, that track there. Yeah, Moor Green, yeah, that's it. And the wind stopped. And I looked round, and there was that many people looking at this twin-engine car. There was 60 people stood around my car. And the wind had dropped because it's like a windbreak. And they're like, "Oh, what's this? Of course, it went well. It was brilliant. It flew. It made all the right noises. It cost me 800 quid for the 2 engines. I mean, engines, gearbox, carbs, clutches, the whole lot, they were 800 quid the pair. And the exhaust from Tony Law was 800 quid. It was as much for the exhaust. But in those days, a good sort of BJ engine was 10 grand. Then you needed a Hewland gearbox and a clutch and an MBE. And, you were into 12 or 15 grand before you even sniffed at it to be top line. This thing, you'd got 250 horsepower for 800 quid. So, of course, the world was like set alight with it. And then the bandit in the field, basically, NASA said you can't race it. So I wasn't over happy with that. So we battled that, but we got it through in the end. We got it through in the end. And look at it now. I mean, twin-engine cars. We actually have got blasé about them. But when you see people's faces when they see a twin-engine car, so well, how does that work then? How do you get? They always ask the same questions. I used to go to the NEC when a very early times when I was doing it, and we had stands there for Z cars. And people look at some of the twin-engine stuff we've built, and they were just in awe of it. They loved it, which was a good PR move for me moving into the kit car game. Building cars that were different, and it was almost normal to us. But to them, it was, hell did he do it? Well, we just bolt it together, mate. Let's see what it goes like.
Yeah.
Don't be frightened of that.
Let's get back onto that in a while, because we want to go back to your earlier Class 10 days. We're going to go to 1989, which I'm sure you will have a bit to say. First off, just a quick answer: was this first nationals you raced at as a competitor? Then was this first nationals you actually raced at?
No, I'd raced the Class 9. At Ludlow, years earlier, in probably 83.
85, that was a wet one, wasn't it? It was a wet one, I think.
A wet one, yeah. And I remember standing on the street.
Yeah. Saturday was a really nice day. Sunday was a washout.
Yeah, Sunday race. Well, I'd never raced on a clay track, not like that. Scarborough always had some grip in it because of the shale. And I was alongside Lyndon Phelps in the grid. I had a pair of brand new tyres on the back. SP82 Dunlops and big knobbly hard.
Oh, yeah.
They're horrible tyres. But obviously they were big wide tyres, and I was transverse engine, and I just looked and I thought, I should be first to this corner. And I was stood, and I was telling everybody, nobody's going to beat me to that first corner on this one. And they didn't. But I couldn't get around it. I just went straight on. It just wouldn't turn. And I didn't realise you had to be at walking pace to get around the bend. Never raced on anything like it before, you know. And so it was a bit of a lesson learned there again, you know. If it's greasy, slow is fast. And so you've got to learn that. Funny, actually, because Mick Oldby had a video camera. And one of the big advantages that we had early on was he used to video his own races, but he used to video me. And then we'd sit in the bus on a night and critique each other as to where we'd gone wrong. You went wide there, you were going too fast there, you didn't do this. And it's amazing when you go back through it and you look and you work out, yeah, I cocked up there, I need to do better. In fact, I'll go as far as to say there's a lot of people get out the car and say the car's useless. You need to look at yourself. You need to think, I cocked that up, or is it the car? Because there's no point twiddling the car every race if you made a mistake. If you made a mistake, be honest about it and leave the car alone. Too much twiddling can cause you big problems, you know. Once you get it set, you should be able to race it, you know. But yeah, so Tardy Big, yeah. What a famous, very famous race. And probably a turning point there.
Right. Well, apparently this was the Nationals, which you raced at after you'd shortened the car. And you'd had a pretty decent set of heats. Couldn't really go too badly there. In fairness, I think the story was Terry was not quite on his best form, but he was still good enough to be there and make the final. Which I actually I've shared the video and I've shared a still photo from that final, and you actually commented about it and explained from your point of view there. I'm sure we're gonna get a detailed point of view from it here, because it's got to be the closest finish I've ever seen. I know there's been some close finishes in the national final, but the fact that I took that picture, I paused the footage as you literally crossed the line. You passed that post, and you could not tell who was in front.
Well, I will.
Yeah, just
that's off the video, isn't it? Yeah. But it's interesting, really, because I'd been starting to get sort of closer and closer to Terry Brown. We'd started to sort of get rattling on a bit, and it was starting to be sort of a bit of a rivalry, I suppose. But when we got to the final, he was in grid 3, I think, and I was in 5 or 6, and the lights had failed, so they were starting it with a bloke with a flag, and Terry Brown actually jumped it. He went about half a car length and dipped his clutch, and the bloke let the flag go. And as Terry jumped it, I thought, oh, he's jumped it. But the flag went, so I went, Terry went, and he was flustered. I'm sure he was flustered into the first bend because he went wide, and he never went wide. He never made mistakes like that. And I think it had just unsettled him enough, and I snuck under him on the first bend. And from then on, I was in front all the race, and it went round and round and round and round. God, you're a long race when you're in front. You know, you are a long way. And all the time I'm thinking, tight and tidy, make it a long way around, make it a long way around. Going into the bottom corner, I was tight and tidy, and he rattled over 3 wagon tyres. You can see him flick up. And there were proper wagon tyres in them days. So he'd gone for a gap that really wasn't there, hit the sidebar on my car, which was something we'll talk about maybe later on, but the sidebar was bent by a foot. Give us a good clatter and pushed me wide. But I kept my foot in it, didn't lose the car, and now I'm wide and a bit deeper. But I'm tramming, and as we set off coming up towards it, if you watch the video, as we're coming towards the line, I've actually got more momentum than him, and I'm coming back at him for the finish. So as we go over the camera, we're neck and neck. But I've taken 2 car lengths out of him over the last 50 yards. When we get to the line, which was another 10 yards further on, I believe I was in front. But it was bloody close. Yeah. So when we came off, everybody thought I'd won. And everybody's like clapping and cheering because he was a new champion, you know. And Terry had his fair whack of wins, to be fair. And he even said to me after, I said, bloody hell, that was close, mate. You jumped it, you old bugger. You know, I pulled his leg because I was happy, you know, I'd won the Nationals. And then the tannoy went, there's got to be a decision on this. And you know what's going to happen then, don't you? It's not going to it. So gutted. Anyway, sure enough, to get with me. So you can't take it back. But what it did do, because I've always been fairly determined, you know, if you're a racer, there's that streak in you.
Yeah.
That was a turning point. And I thought, right, that's fine. We'll now push the boat out. So that was the year that I bought a Chevy engine, and I bought a brand new Hewland FG400 gearbox. Brand fire new, 4,700 quid in them days. It's probably worth a fortune more than that now. So I built another car. But Tardy Big was one of them, you know, you look back on it and think, yeah, that's fine. There've been a few turning points over the years, but that was one of them. And, you know, when you're that close to a Nationals championship, oh man, I mean, it's tough, you know, it is tough. And then your emotions get involved, you get upset and you get annoyed and you think, nah, I'm sorting that. So actually that then increased the rivalry. You know, there was then serious rivalry then for quite a few years. And you know, it was worth probably 2 car lengths a lap, was that. Just Terry Brown's there, I'm going to have him. You know, it was just that determination to sort of beat him. I mean, I'm more laid back nowadays, you know, I don't get so wound up, but in them days I was keen to be winning and I would do anything to make it and you know, go. So I built a new car that winter. That was the car, that was a good car, that was. Martin Hans ended up with it. He ended up in Ireland with that car eventually. But that was the one with the small box Chevy in it. So I bought a brand new small box Chevy from America, imported it. That was 2,200 quid. I took it to engine data analysis at Castleford, who's still there, Kenny Coleman. He stripped it, checked it, put it together, made sure it was right, put it on the dyno. We got 15 horsepower more out of it by changing the plugs from a hard plug to a soft plug. Unbelievable, you know, when you're on a proper engine dyno. But yeah, and that was the basis for the next car, which in its first season, I broke the FG400 4 times. Smashed it to bits. Wasn't strong enough. So I then went direct drive. And that was quite a good thing because eventually it was bomb proof was the thing. But first meeting I went to at Scarborough, I pulled up, went out, broke the input shaft on it on the direct drive system. Looking at it in the pits, I'm laid under it in the pits, and John Briggs comes over and he uttered the immortal words. I knew that wouldn't work. It won't work that. And I thought, bloody will, mate. Definitely will. So I potted home and I cured the problem. I'd welded it with some normal like electric welding rods, and it needed dissimilar rods because it was hardened steel was the pinion shaft. But we got there in the end with it and made it bomb proof, and that was a good car. That was Christ. I had that. I don't know how many years. I made the exhausts. I made a set of exhausts that swept up from either side, up round and down over the back, and it was 6-inch diameter was the silencer pipe. And I made them with a stick welder. How do you make a set of exhausts with a stick welder? And my mate had a pipe bender, and we'd put a little bend in a pipe and cut it, shape it, and get it real close, then tickle around it with stick welder. We hadn't MIG welders. We didn't have a MIG welder. I can't believe it. You know, a MIG welder, I just gone. But you know, in them days, that's all we had. A little stick welder. But it was 6-inch bore was the exhaust. It was mint. I used to have a stuffed rabbit. I had a stuffed rabbit. I used to push it right up the exhaust in the pits. And when the kids came in the pits in the interval, I used to start it up and blip the throttle. And this rabbit had come shooting out the back and roll across in the grass. It'd be smoking. And I'd look and I'd go, bloody hell, he must have gone up there for a kick. And I still get people now say to me, I once saw a rabbit come out of your exhaust when I was a kid. You know, still remember that.
Well, I'm sorry, Chris, but when you sent me your notes and I just saw Rabbit Story, I was almost a bit scared of what it was about. But anyway, we covered quite a lot of that. Sorry?
Yeah.
Sorry, what was
Fitzpatrick from Malk Fitzpatrick from Evesham said he said I was about 8 or 9. you were my hero because you had a rabbit up your exhaust. And I said to him, it was just a bit of a game, it was just a bit of a laugh. But yeah, a good time. I like it.
Yeah. Well, just to reflect what we've just covered, going back to '89, I suppose the thing is, yes, a lot of people, especially the Welsh, no disrespect, but they do regard Terry Brown very highly. As you said, he won 6 straight at the Nationals in Class 10, but I think to everybody else, no disrespect to Terry, but he was on another level for almost all of those years. But somebody actually came along and really pushed him, really challenged him, and that was you with that car. And you see the result your way, and quite a few people out there actually support that as well, which was proven when I put the photo and the video on the internet, and people saw it. They believed you were the rightful winner. And to be fair, I think into today it would definitely be like that, because Terry would have been probably kicked out from the jump start. So
probably.
It's obviously a different time. It's a few years ago now. So while we reflect, it happened, and that's what it was. So, but that, I think the crowd at the time was seriously appreciated, because somebody did actually properly challenge it, and that was the thing. But unfortunately, 1990 didn't quite have the same impact. You got third at that Nationals, which wasn't too bad, but obviously it's a slight come down from the year before, and I'm sure you maybe felt the same, because you'd obviously started to try and progress further, and nobody wants to drop back, do they? You want to stay above. But you mentioned about the Isle of Wight Nationals in the notes, 1991. You would finish second at that one again, to Paul Fackrell this time. But what I've always fascinated about with the Isle of Wight Nationals is any stories that are involved, and hopefully you've got something. I always share the one about my dad, where his best mate at the time had qualified for the Nationals in Class 2. So they decided to, I think, set off on Wednesday, something like that. Obviously drive down, get the ferry, all that. They got there, they dropped the car off wherever it was meant to be, and then they decided to go visit the island and go on a bit of a pub crawl. And they woke up Saturday morning in a field somewhere, and by the time they got to the track, his mate had missed scrutineering and wasn't allowed to race. So I think they actually came home. So I don't think they stayed. Yeah. So what memories have you got from the Isle of Wight?
The Isle of Wight, we went the year before. Bumble, Michael, be myself. I don't know, I think we were the 3 that went. We went from the South Wales Open, I think it was, and we ended up going across to the Isle of Wight. We thought we'll go have a look. Of course, it wasn't going to be on that field. It was near Parkhurst Prison, was the grass track field. And God, we had a good weekend there. Terry Brown went across. He went as well, and we had a really good weekend, because the Isle of Wight guys, they're on an island. They struggle like mad to get people there, so they're so grateful to see you. And they had a nice little track. They had a beer tent. I remember the beer tent was extremely successful, and we had a good time the year before. But then when we went back for the Nationals, I mean, they really pulled the stops out. People talk about Nationals now, but I'll tell you, for a little club, they had everything sorted. When you came off the ferry, bearing in mind, how old would Jade be? She would be 7 or 8, something like that. She was born in 85. So what would it, 91 was it? Yeah, she'd be 6. Andy Holtby would probably be 8, and his brother John would be 9 or 10 perhaps. But so there's 4 young kids in the bus, bored out of your skull, aren't you, when you're a kid, when you're driving along. And the 4 mum, the 2 mums and dads on both sides. But we came off the ferry, and as we drive off the ferry, there was a sign at the exit of the ferry, Nationals this way, an arrow. Yeah. And then half a mile further, another one, and another one, and another one. And then as you were getting closer, it's nearly there, just on the top of this hill. And it's like, keep going, you're nearly there. It was a little thing, but my kids were looking out for it. And they were all, oh, look, Dad, there's another one, there must be another one in a minute. Kids keep looking, and it was little things like that. We pulled into the field, and they'd got a shower block for everybody that was camping. And bearing in mind, in them days, a lot of people lived in tents. It is not like it is now. It is absolutely not like it is now. Nobody had any brass. Everybody was sort of doing it on the bones of their ass. And they had showers with hot water. Well, that was just tremendous. For a little club to think of that in those days was fantastic as far as I'm concerned. Nationals went well enough. I mean, it was just a Nationals, But I remember John Greenwood's dad, who would be quite getting on a bit then, playing football with all the kids, and he had a hat on. I'm John Greenwood's dad, because John Greenwood, I think, was reigning champion of champions. He was, yeah. He was, and he was reigning national champion. Yeah. And he was a lovely old bloke. And I remember standing and looking at him, watching him, thinking, when I'm an old bloke, I'd like to have a motorhome and turn up and still be going racing. Because he was having a whale of a time, was the old lad. And now I'm not quite as old as he was, but I'm still going and still racing. So it's a sport you can do for a long time if you want to, and people sort of make you fairly welcome, really, to be fair, no matter how old you are. From 10 years, Jesus, I mean, we're at 10-year-olds now. But yeah, it was a good Nationals, was that. It didn't matter about the results. Results, you can go on and on about them. I've won lots of races, I've lost lots of races, I've had controversy. Doesn't matter. It's just part of it. When I first started racing, and I was a policeman, I knew that people would target me if I wasn't careful. If you did anything seriously wrong, they were going to throw the book at you because they just want to get one back on a policeman. So you have to be fairly careful. So I've not had a lot of black flags over the years. You can count them on one hand. I've hardly bent any front wishbones on the specials because I don't go banging and bashing. I don't believe in it. I believe in racing. And if we race, you have so much fun racing. Some people are always crashing and always in sort of controversial circumstances. I don't want it. I want to come away and forget everything else and just have some sport, because it is a sport. It is. And it's a good sport, definitely a good sport. I wouldn't be where I am today without grass tracking, I'll tell you. I wouldn't have the engineering skills that I've got or the people skills. It's part of what I've done for such a long time, and you've got to take lessons from it. You're a fool if you don't learn from something going wrong. If something goes wrong or you do something wrong, hold your hands up and just say, look, I've done that wrong, and I'm sorry about that, and off we go. But yeah, it's tempers get flared a bit sometimes when you're racing, but it's good fun, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, some people, some people it's a hobby. For some, it involves a business. For some, it's what they live for, and just how it is. And that is the great thing about the sport, is that it attracts so many different levels. Back when you started, it was a hobby. Then it became a business. It's now back to a hobby again, but you are taking on more serious aspects of it as well. But be all and end all, you are not forgetting that it is still something that you want to enjoy doing on a weekend, on a bit of free time from doing what you do in the week. That's what it is about. And and again, if it wasn't for Autograss, we wouldn't be here talking about it. So it's a good job you did.
No, that's great. I mean,
we're sort of closing in on the end of your initial Class 10 career, because I think 92 was the last year that you attempted in Class 10 before you made a change. You said results don't matter, but I look at this one as another near one. You finished second again. Again, it was a hell of a race. But just explain this, because obviously for 93 you would have a completely new focus, new challenge on what you was going to do. So was it sort of during this year or before that you decided, no, I've had a good go at it, I'm going to try a different route? So when did the transition start to come in? I mean, like I said, the Class 10 5 was a hell of a race. And that Nationals, again, there was, apart from the Opens, which didn't get any coverage, it was the Nationals, the main thing which people heard about. But when did it decide that you'd run your course with the car and the class?
Well, then in 92, I bought a motorbike for the road. I bought a Triumph motorbike and started riding it and thought, Jesus, this thing's got some power. And I started toying with the idea of building a bike engine special for Class 8. And I'd done a lot with Class 10. I mean, I'd done loads with Class 10. And the car was worth decent money. You know, I'd sold the Hewland gearbox. I got the same money that I paid for it back on it because it was like brand new. You know, it was literally a season old. It went to, I can't think of his first name. Is it Irwin, something like that? Jones, who was the PhD lad that had a coach company. He had a BDG hung to it. In 7, yeah. And it sold it to him for the same money that I paid for it. So I sort of got out of that. I've done my direct drive thing for a year or two. That was reliable. Martin Hans bought the car. And, you know, I mean, it was a good car to buy, to be fair. Well sorted. There was nothing wrong with the car, you know, get it bought. So that left me with, shall I build another car? And again, a lad called Tommy Cotton from Manchester had a Class 8 with a Yamaha, and it wouldn't run right. And it was popping and banging, and he had a Tony Law exhaust on it, and I gave him 400 quid for the engine and the exhaust complete. Fetched it home, built a car around it, and all I did to cure the popping and missing, it was running weak. And so I just got the springs out of the CVs on the, you know, the constant velocity cabs, and I pulled the springs real long, and that made it lift the springs slower and richened it up, and that was it. And I ran it all year, never touched it. And that was the Class 8s. So that was the first 8 that I built using that engine, and it on a shoestring.
Yeah. Didn't Tommy Cotton end up with one of your cars? Was that correct? Did he buy a car? Yeah. Yeah. Because
I think he ended up with the Thunderbolt Chrysler at one point.
Yeah.
I think he ended up in 10 with that Chrysler. Yeah. John Gaffney had the Chrysler for a while.
All right.
Yeah. John Gaffney bought the Chrysler off me and ran it for a while. Carl Mosley ran up the back of him at North of England and knocked the carburettor up and set fire to the car. And they were sat on top of each other and the car was on fire underneath. That went down well. But that car went round a little bit, because Andy Calladine had it at one point as well, from Pennine. That Chrysler, so that went through a few sets of hands. But the big Chevy ended up in Ireland doing quarry racing. It was all Ireland quarry racing champion for years and years and years. Nothing could get near it in the quarries. You know, it was a hell of a thing, really. Yeah. Dead simple, strong.
So you would move on to Class A, which it's a completely different thing to Class 10. Obviously, smaller, light. I mean, smaller in Class 8 to Class 10 terms back then, anyway. I mean, nowadays cars are almost the same size, but bearing in mind that a Class 10 back in those days was about 12 foot long.
There were.
So did you? I know it's a different concept, but do you carry any knowledge across from your Class 10 days to this Class 8, or did you basically start from a fresh sheet of paper and imagination?
Yeah, I started afresh. I mean, it's funny how sort of things just pan out. You wonder about. I spent hours in scrapyards looking at parts on cars, thinking I could make something of that. And for years, I'd wanted to put trailing arms on a car. And I dared put them on a 10. I could have fabricated some, and nowadays I would have fabricated some. But I happened to be in the scrapyard at Market Wight, and I looked in the back of a 2.5 Triumph estate car, and there was a pair of trailing arms sat with the drive shafts and the hubs and everything on them, and they've been taken off this car, and they were laid in the back. They're all aluminium. And I took one look at them and thought, they're going on this Class 8. And and I built Class 8 around the trailing arms, because I wanted to keep it as light as I could, because obviously it's only a 1,000cc engine. I mean, coming from a sort of 5.3 litre or 5.5 litre, whatever it is, Chevy to a 1,000cc Yamaha, I took it into a field at Potter, and a farmer mate of mine said, "I'd never raz around the field," and it was useless on the grass. It had no go at all. I'm thinking, "Oh Christ, this is crap." But I went to Scarborough, first meeting of the year, pulled up between Lee Higgins and John Greenwood. Both got Cosworth engines in, both top Class 8 lads. And we started in the bottom of Scarborough in them days. And it shot out the grid. I was first to the corner, chucked it in the corner, broke a drive shaft. And the drive shafts, I'd made them as light as I could. And obviously they failed. So I pulled off and I parked up, so I'm just having a quick look at it. And John Briggs came over again. John Briggs, who every time I saw him said, "That'll never work." I knew that wouldn't work. So he said to me, "That'll never work, it'll never work." And I thought, it bloody will, mate, and it's York tomorrow because it's Easter Monday. So I went to Beechwood Scrapyard at Market Wight again, and I got 2 Hillman Hunter prop shafts. And in a Hillman Hunter, there was a rubber sort of section, like a cush drive in the prop shaft. And I thought, that cush will help me. And in them days, people used to run. Do you remember them donuts that they had on the Hillman Imps? People used to run them as like a cush drive in their drive shafts. Well, I thought it would be a bit like an Hillman Imp sort of donut, and it's a bigger CV and it's a bigger UJ on the end. So I cobbled these 2 drive shafts on, sat on the start line at York, and I lapped everybody in the first race. Greenwood, up to Greenwood. I didn't lap John Greenwood, but I was close. You know, and I was just doing daft things. I was going in the loose on the outside. It was phenomenal. Absolutely. I mean, the car was before its time. And it was to do with the trailing arms. It's the trailing arms that did it. And the book that I referred to earlier, Larry Hofer and Fred Punn wrote, How to Make Your Car Handle, it talks about trailing arms. And it has 1 page about them. They don't like trailing arms. But they don't understand the theory of a trailing arm. And the theory behind it, if you understand the theory behind a trailing arm, you understand why we use them in grass track racing. Do you know the theory behind it?
Nah, I wouldn't have a clue.
You're going to say no. No. Well, if you imagine a wheel, when a wheel spins forwards, whatever's holding that wheel tries to spin backwards. So the trailing arm that's going forwards is trying to go backwards. And that introduces lift on the front rose joints. So whatever grip you've got on the ground, when you drop the clutch, it goes bang, and it tries to lift the car. And that's why the car's wheelie. So it's trying to introduce lift into it. Whereas if you've got a hub and you've got 2 rods going forwards and back like falling, it doesn't introduce any lift into it. So you whatever Newton's law says, for every action there is a reaction. And for every force there's an opposite and equal force acting against it. There's some technical for you. But basically, if when you spin your wheel, it's got 100 pounds of grip on the tyre. It's trying to twist the arm backwards by 100 pounds of grip. That 100 pounds that it's lifting is trying to lift the car, and it's pushing the tyre down. And that's it. That's it. And I'd known that for, probably 5 or 6 years, and wanted to try it on a car, and I didn't do it. And I sort of kicked myself, because actually I could have really gone in the 10. I could have murdered everything in the 10 the first season that I copied it. People copy things, don't they? You know, you can't stop it. But I would have had such an advantage in 10 then, because we had too much power, hard, narrow, pumped up tyres, because we didn't have bead lockers. You know, we were on 13 tyres. I mean, Jesus Christ, man. The power that we had, the weight that we had, the fact that we couldn't get the tyres as slack as we wanted them to find grip. You know, we did well to move all in the bloody things. but that enabled me to build this car. So this car was probably the next generation where I wanted to go, and it was just an instant hit. I never lost a race in that car all year, all season. I mean, unbelievable. 3 heat wins at the Nationals, won the Nationals. I was partnered with the South Somerset lad.
No,
real nice.
No, it's
Dad's big into bloody classics. But I was partnered with this lad, and on the truck I said, "Do you know you would have won?"
Cleo.
Graham Cleo.
Yeah.
Lovely lad, and he was at me all the time because he had a real nice little Suzuki engine. I think it was would it be a Suzuki Swift? I'm not sure, but it was a Suzuki, a little 1300 Suzuki engine, a beautiful little engine, lovely car, and he could pedal it. You know, he was quick. But I said to him on the truck when we finished, I said, you know, if I hadn't been here, you would have won this, because he was there all the time, and nobody could get near him. The pair of us had sort of gone. So, but yeah, and that was the start of the end of the BDAs or whatever they were in the class. You know, it suddenly just spawned all these bike engine cars. You know, so but yeah, happy days. Happy days.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about. We've spoken about results and that, but what did it actually mean to actually have a clear-cut national championship? I mean, you tried so hard, and then you changed your focus, you went on something else, and that first year you won. It must have meant quite a lot at the time.
Oh yeah, it did. I mean, it's funny actually. You know, the winning of the Nationals was good, but building the car was even better. You know, when I look back on it, that was another turning point. Was that I'd sort of got a bit stale with. I'd raced everybody. I knew everybody. They knew me, and it's almost you're turning up, and if you're in the same class all the time, you sort of know how everybody drives, and you get used to it. When you start a new challenge, it's a clean sheet of paper. You don't know how good the next bloke is. You know he's good because you've watched him race. But you don't know just how good he is to hit yourself against him. So it was almost a new challenge, really. And it's just mint having a little car like that. I had 4 tyres brand new on it at the start of the year, and I put a pair of new tyres on for the Nationals on back. That's all it had all year. Really? Can you imagine? I mean, that was yeah. And it won everything. I mean, it won fastest man on grass. It won every race I ever bloody went to. It was a phenomenal car. Car. You know, and obviously people took notice, and that was the start of Z cars. Really, the true sort of beginnings of Z cars, of me actually selling cars, because I'd raced up to that point. I'd raced for myself. You know, I'd sold cars. You know, and if you had a successful car, people would buy it. But obviously, that first sort of year with that was a real turning point, and people had their eye on the car and wanted one, and just started sort of approaching us. Tim Barton was the first. Tim Barton.
Yeah. Tim, Isle of Wight's first ever national champion. He was in Class 5 back then, and apparently that car actually had quite a long life after. It went into like autocross or something on the island. It was still going as of about even about 6 years ago. It was still going.
Successful car. He had a chassis. He just had a basic rolling chassis, and he rang me and said, "Can you build me a rolling chassis?" And I'd sold the original car to Roy Hamley for Andy, and sold it for strong money. It really, you know, and I thought, bloody hell, I could sell these. You know, and that was the first sort of thought I had to build a few of these and sell them. And within a week of selling the car to Andy Hamley, Tim Barton rang up, "Will you build me a chassis?" And I said, "Yeah, I will." So I would set on and build him a chassis. Terry Seagraves rang up, "I want a rolling chassis." So that was 2, literally within a fortnight. And then Dave Fielder came along and said, well, my lad's 16 in July or whatever next year, will you build me a full car, same as yours? So I had 3 orders, literally in 2 or 3 weeks. And I said to the missus, I can build a few, it'll pay for my racing. So I was still working full-time as a bobby. Well, I was the detective at Pocklington at the time. And busy with that, but in my spare time, I would build cars. And, you know, just set on like that. So, yeah.
So, well, obviously then you had a new focus in life because you gained this interest because of what you was doing with your own cars. And at that time, I mean, yes, there was the odd few people building cars back in the days, but nobody had really made a serious profession from it. I mean, people who were building cars for 1 or 2 others still had day jobs, still doing other things. But we'll talk in a moment about the startup of Z cars. But I mean, it's quite obvious that you would build a car, but it was almost like what they do in like Formula One. Yeah, they'll build a car for the start of the season, but by the end of it, it'll have had 20 million different things on it because they have different parts, trial and error. And you was like that with the Class 8s. I mean, there were no end of times where like in Class 8, the bike engine revolution would take over, but through the mid-90s, you was actually then trialing a Vauxhall engine or a Peugeot engine or things like that. And was this just trying to prove to yourself that there were alternatives out there and different things can work and it didn't have to go down a formula route as such?
Yeah, I mean, one of my big things is just being a bit different and just trying to make the best of something that is different. So the catalogue of cars I've built is just massive. Not only in grass tracking, but the kit cars and all the other stuff that we've done. So to me, it's like you're baking a cake. You've got all these ingredients, and you've got the same ingredients, but somebody will make a Dundee cake and somebody will make a Christmas cake. You know, you've got an engine. So what are the power characteristics of that engine? What are you going to do with that engine? Well, the bike engines are light, high revving. They're obviously you're going to build a real lightweight car, blah, 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 blah. But then you put something like the diesel in, completely different power characteristics. So you've got to build a different car to make that work. So for me, the challenge is not just the basics of building the car, but actually getting the best out of that car. And, you know, I suppose it was my job as well, I suppose, when you look at it. You know, if you're doing it and you're doing it for a living, you've sort of got to have the results. You've got to prove what you've done is a good way going forwards. Now, one of the bugbears of it all is as soon as you unveil a new idea, somebody's in their shed copying it. And so you don't get very long in the game to be different or to have that advantage. The first year in Class 8, there is no doubt about it, the car was a class car. In its field, it was the best car in the field, full stop. He started to drive it, but at the end of the day, the combination of car and driver made it pretty much unbeatable in the year. 2 years later, there was 30 of them out there. A few years after, everything's like that. So now they're absolutely on the raggy edge. There is nothing more to come, I don't think, out of Class 8. They're buying carbon fibre steering wheels and carbon fibre this and that and the other. You know, they're getting lighter and lighter and lighter. But you're spending more and more money to lose a pound or 2 pounds or just. But the actual chassis design and the stuff, the shockers is a big thing. But again, you know, do you understand them? Do you understand them enough yourself to be in that field and reliably change them to make them better? Tough asking that, you know. The Grand Prix motorbike lads and all the rally lads and that have somebody there with a computer watching all the data logging, making the shockers can, and we're in a field twiddling it, and the bloody tracks change 3 times over the day. You know, you know that. In fact, that's probably one of the advantages of grassing, because the bloke can come out with a water cart and completely knacker the whole job. You know, so you've just got to get on. You know, you talk to the lads when I was circuit racing, they can't believe that you get no practice. They can't believe that you just dump the clutch and bugger off into the first corner, and you might have dumped a load of water there, and nobody tells you where it is. You know, you just got to watch the car like a pot gets. You know, and if he's at too much water on, well, you're straight round, aren't you? So and it's a bit of a lottery, but you know, you've got to make the best of what you've got, haven't you? So yeah.
Exactly. But through this progression of trial and error in yourself, but you would get this foundation of what would become Z cars. You look at it now and you see cars are by this constructor or that constructor, but in the mid to late 90s, if you wanted to win in Class A, you had to have a Z car, pretty much. And you would look at it at the National, where about half the field would be a Z car chassis, and almost every finalist would be a Z car chassis. So, for a personal feeling, what was that like seeing? Because obviously it changed your life in a way. It made you leave a job that you'd grown up doing and obviously enjoyed doing and being part of it. Yes, it was quite tense and serious with what you were doing, but actually doing something like this where your hobby had become a profession. What was it like actually having this where people was asking you for, because they wanted to win at this sport and they wanted advice on things and that? What did it really mean?
Well, it's quite satisfying, really. I think you watch people grow. I'll take an example, the Quinns. So Laura Quinn, Abby Quinn, when they were young lasses, they came to us. I built Abby a Class 5, a bike-powered Class 5.
Yeah.
That was just a hell of it. And I think she's still got the car in one of the sheds. She walked back with it.
Yeah,
and when she was 16, she came to Hornsey when I was building it. And I remember as clear as day, you know, she was dead excited to get this new car. You know, do you think it'll win? It'll win, don't you worry about that. And then she was away, winning in it, you know, winning against the men in it eventually. You know, I don't know whether she started with the ladies or whether she went straight in the men's. But she's obviously a hell of a good driver, is Abby. But, you know, and you look at it, and they had 4 or 5 cars off me over the years, you know, and you look, people come back if they're happy with what you've done. And it's a bit like a restaurant, you know, they come back if the food's good, don't they? So you're trying to everybody. I've always been brutally honest with people. You know, you'll get somebody. I remember I sold a car to Steve Stratton, a Class 8, brand new car. He sold his car to somebody else. And it was one of my Z cars that he'd sold. And I have a way of setting them up. Anyway, after the first meeting, Steve Stratton rang and he said, "It's all right, but it's sort of, the understeer is a bit going into the corner." I said, "Just turn this outside rose joint one turn. One full turn, you'll cure it." So, right, okay. Half an hour later, his mate rang. He said, "Bloody hell, this thing turns in too quick." I said, "Yeah, turn that rose joint the other way, one full turn." Next weekend, they rang and they said, "You've cured it. One turn of a rose joint." But everybody drives different. So you'll get a customer and they'll say, "I've got a problem. You need to know the answer." You know, you can bullshit all you want, but if you don't know the answer, it's no good. And you've got to understand the car. So I've always been dead honest with people and say, "Look, you know, we are trying to add," because I'll see somebody spin 4 times and know that there isn't a lot wrong with the car, but they're spinning on every corner, trying to add. You know, back off a tad and feel for grip. You know, if you put a camera on my right foot on the car, I'm on and off the gas and feeling for it all the time, feeling for grip. You know, and some people are just flat out everywhere. And they say, "I was flat out," and then they spin. You know, they spin 2 or 3 times every meeting. You think, well, you know, you don't often see me spin of my own accord. I do get spun, and you know, you do go around if you hit the wet patches and that. But you've just got to be feeling for it all the time and have some sympathy for it. And then criticise yourself. If you've got it wrong yourself, don't blame the car straight away. Look at what you did. And if it is you, discount it, learn from it. And if it is the car, look at the car. you know. And yeah, I mean, but it is immensely satisfying seeing people smiling, you know, when they're really chuffed with what you've done, and when you see them with a trophy, they've won, you know, they won the nationals or whatever in one of your cars. Yeah, it is. It's a buzz, isn't it? You know, it's not many of them get that chance, do we? You know.
No,
so,
no. As you know, I mean, there could have been the occasions where you may have thought to yourself that it wasn't going to happen because you'd obviously tried and you'd come close, and there was an occasion where it might not have happened, but fortunately it did, and it helped actually evolve yourself into this business and this profession, which become, and like I say, I mean, you became a mainstream constructor where people would only originally, like back in the day, Bruce Campbell would build a few cars for those in the West Midlands, maybe the Welsh region. Bob Mosley would build quite a lot of cars for around in the Lincolnshire area as such, but yours was going nationally because something you'd done right was appealing, and people wanted to win. So if they want to win, they've got to get that thing out, and they'd obviously seen you from that '93 nationals, and that sort of thought, well, you can only give them a call, can't you? And if they say, Chris, I like what you've got, could you build me one? You could have said no.
Yeah.
But in the end, you went with it, and it weren't a bad decision in the end, was it? So, Zcar started obviously like any business, quite small, and it started to progress through. We'll skip through past a couple of notes we've got, but eventually you would end up into quite a wide stream of publicity. You would end up out there building cars, not just for the grass tracks, but for the tarmac as well, and a lot of track day toys for people, a lot of race cars on the circuits as well. One thing which I do recall was you built. Well, I don't know if it was built ground up or whether it was just your knowledge which had gone into it, but I recall the car being called the Tiger Z100, which you ended up putting 2 bike engines in, and it would make a world record. Which was it, the fastest acceleration or 0 to 100 or something? Just explain about how you got involved with that.
Well, I built 2 twin engine versions for Tiger. I built an early one. I got on with Tiger because they were at kit car shows and I was doing the bike engine minis. And got talking, and I said I could build one with 2 engines in for you. I'd actually built one for a fella called Dave Jones who came with a Westfield. The first kit car I built with 2 engines in, a Lotus 7, was a Westfield. And I put 2 ZX9 engines. And this bloke was an engineer from the Midlands, real particular guy, and he came with his chassis to when I was in Aldbury, in the village, in the old house. And he came, and I looked at it, and he'd taken all the panels off. It was just like a rolling frame. I said, yeah, we need to cut it here. And I got the 9-inch grinder out and cut a big hole in his car, all the chassis, to make it room for these 2 engines. And a week later, I'd got 2 engines mounted in, and he came back, and he said to me, when I left here the other day, I thought you'd scrapped my car. He said, I can't believe that you've got 2 engines in it in a week, and I can now see what you're going to do. Jeff Beresford built me a little drag box, 2 inputs and 1 output on it, and we made this thing go, and it was a real successful little hill climb car. He built it for hill climb, and we had it at the NEC that year, and it set the world alight. It was like really, really good was that. But then Tiger approached me, and I built 2 cars for them. One was 2-wheel drive, the same as the Westfield, and the other was a 4-wheel drive one. And that had 2 ZX10, ZX12 Kawasaki engines in. So they're the same engines that Graham Blackburn runs in his 7. It weighs about what a Class 7 would weigh. So you can imagine. But obviously, one engine was spun round to a Sierra diff driving the front wheels, and the other engine was the normal way around, driving back through a prop shaft to the back wheels. So it was completely front, rear sort of separated. By then, I'd got into the government for some grants, and I developed an electronics package for it where it cut the power to the front engine so you could steer it. Because if you come into a corner and you turn the front wheels and you get turned in and you put your foot down, it'll just understeer like a pig. Yeah. You just hit the hedge. So you've got to cut the power to the front wheels. So we developed had 20 grand from the government of allotted funding to develop. Oh yeah, to develop this thing. I got right into the grant system, and you've got to fill a lot of paperwork in, and you've got to put your case. But I put my case. I said, look, built this twin engine car. I think I can sell some. Blah blah blah. Fill all these forms in, and they said, yeah, we'll give you 20 grand towards it. So the first day that we went out with this thing, I had the lad there from Motec. Rich Bulmer from Motec was sat, and he sat in the passenger seat with the laptop, and we had 3 G sensors on the car, one at the front, one in the middle, one at the back. Yeah. We had steering angle in, throttle position we knew the engine revs, and when you're driving in a straight line, just give it full power. When it senses steering and the G sensors read the G, we can cut power. And the more steering and the more G it sees, the more power you cut from the front engines. You don't ever cut power at the rear. So we went to Elvington, and we hooned around Elvington for half a day. And within an hour or two, we had this thing like going pretty well. Mm. And that tea time, I said to him, well, we've spent $1 grand today. Now what we're going to do, because we've got 20 grand to go out here. Jesus. Anyway, we developed it. But literally in the first day, we had it somewhere near. We refined it and we messed and we changed it. And we managed to spend the money. But that was a hell of a car. You'll have seen that car on 5th gear. Tiffany Dell drove it. The most obnoxious man I've ever come across in my whole life. Honestly, what an absolute pain. He came and he was come to drive this car for 5th gear. So he turns up, you go there, you're all there, and obviously you want it to be successful for publicity for your company, don't you? So he comes, and the first thing he does is, has he got reverse gear? I said, no, it ain't got reverse, mate. It's you're here to set a world record from 0 to 60. Well, I want to break. My mate's just broke the world record for reversing. I want to go backwards fast. I said, well, it hasn't got reverse in it, mate. Oh, well, that's bloody useless. And he was miserable, and he never asked me how to drive it. And there was a technique. There's a technique to everything, isn't there? Yeah. So he gets in the car. And bearing in mind, he's an ex-Formula 1 man, and he blows his own bloody trumpet all the time. And he must have done 100 standing starts with it. And he didn't break 3.6 seconds. And this thing, every time you launch, it did 2.8. It didn't matter if it was wet, because if it was wet, it would wheel spin a bit and just not bog the motors. If it was dry, it just pulled the rear motor down a little bit momentarily. And it would sort of semi-bog, but it still did 2.8 seconds. And I could do it reliably every time. So he did like 100 standing starts. And he says, well, it just won't do it. And I said, well, shall I tell you how to do it? So I told him how to do it, still couldn't do it. And the basic technique was the front engine, you put it into 2nd gear because it'll just wheel spin. Yeah. The rear engine, you put it in 1st gear, and you literally hold it flat out, just back off a little bit, to like 11,000 revs, dump the clutch, count to 1, pull for 2nd gear with the rear engine, and you're there at 60, literally 2.8 seconds. So he had another go and another go. And he said, no, it won't do it. I said, right, I'll tell you what, mate, I'll have a go, shall I? So I sat in it, did it, came back, 2.8 seconds. And it's on the telltale in this thing. I mean, this timing. And, oh, I said, you better get your finger out now, haven't you? So he had another go. He got down to 3.2 seconds. He never did crack 2.8. And in the end, he held it in 1st gear with one engine and went up to 4th with the other and blew an engine. And he came back and he was laughing. I'll tell you, mate. Oh, I was steaming. I was still a policeman then. Yeah. I could have killed him. I really could. I was that mad because it was like a couple of grams worth of engine. He wasn't going to pay for it, you know. Yeah. And what a numpty. What an absolute numpty. I said to him, you will never drive one of my cars again. I don't care who you are, you will never drive anyone. You know, I wouldn't let anybody near him. But then by total contrast, Darren Manning, you've heard that name, he's from Harrogate. He's an Indy young lad. he drove the previous generation car at Chelsea Walsh up the hill climb, and he came for Sky Sports. And he turns up, and he's a young lad, and he bounces out of the car, and he comes over and he said, "Is this the car then?" I said, "Yeah, it is." He said, "Got two engines on it?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." He said, "How does it work?" So I told him, I said, "This is how it works." And he said, "Bloody hell, come on, let's have a go in this." He was really enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So I briefed him on how to set up. And I said to him, "It's got launch control on it." So he said, "What's launch control?" I said, it's a piece of throttle cable, and I've got a little toggle, which is like a toggle on your Parker, and it's just near the steering wheel. If you pull on it, it pulls and it loops round to the brake pedal and it holds the brakes on for you. So you hold it with your fingers, and then you can feel for the clutch biting. If you set the engines at 6,000 revs in first gear, feel for it biting, let go and dump it. It won't bog, it won't wheel spin, it'll just go. "Oh, right," he says. So off he goes. And he goes up the hill 100 times from filming. Yeah. Standing starts every time. And when we finished, he was BAR Honda's test driver for F1 then. Yeah. So he was right in it with this kid. 21-year-old, full of enthusiasm. And he said, he said, "That thing's mint." He said, "And the best thing about it is your launch control." He said, "You've got to laugh. It costs 50 pence." He said, "But I've done a couple hundred standing starts. It's done it every time." He said, "I wish I could get my F1 car to launch like that." And it's cheap and cheerful and went. But the contrast between the two presenters, two TV presenters, was massive. You've got to respect somebody that listens and takes it on board, Whereas Tiffany Dell, he just wasn't bothered. I am the man,
Yeah, if you're not sure about something, you've got to ask, haven't you? You don't go into it blind, otherwise that's when it all goes wrong, which it clearly did there. So, I mean, Z cars grew and grew, didn't it? I mean, you did an awful lot for the circuit racing stuff as well. The minis, whether they were bike engined or later the Honda Type R engines, it grew into a big thing. But you never forgot your roots, really. You never left Autograss too far. And we are actually going to rewind a bit because you did talk about it, which was when you built the twin-engined special. I was surprised when you said, really, that it was such a quick development of actually thinking about it and doing it. Because sometimes, I mean, we know Autograss in development terms is fairly rapid. It's not something which takes, if there's an idea, it doesn't take a whole year for you to put it together. It's done in days, weeks. But so you obviously believe that the twin engine route would work. I mean, obviously, like at the time, Class 9s were they were still running some quite serious engine and gearbox combinations. And I mean, it's again something which does slightly annoy me when people do go on about how Autograss racing was always cheap back in the old days. It was, if that's how you did it. But you still have people out there using BDA engines, fancy Hewland gearbox or whatever other gearboxes, the best suspension at the time. People forget that if you took a BDA Hewland combination now, it's over 100,000 quid. compared to maybe being 10 grand back in the early 90s. So not only was this something which you thought would work, but you went out to try and make a cheaper alternative. But when you saw this fact about you have the two engines side by side in the workshop, did you actually look at did you actually speak to anybody about doing it first, like regarding the rules? Because I mean, did it say that it had to be one engine in a car, or
no?
You just built it.
No, I just built it because it didn't say you couldn't. It just didn't say you couldn't. I thought, bugger it, I'm building it. And I built it, and of course, obviously, there was they came to me after the meeting at Nottingham and said the car's too quick. So, oh, right, okay. Well, there's nothing in the rule book to say you can't have a quick car. We're all striving to go faster. Yeah, but it doesn't say you can have two engines. I said, but it doesn't say you can't. And so the bandit, they made an error at the time of not actually giving me a hearing about it. The bandit out of hand. They said, you can't have it. They should have actually sort of had me in and said, look, we don't think you can have this. What are your thoughts? And discussed it. And then after that, you can then say, no, I'm sorry. But because I hadn't had my say, I took some advice from a solicitor, and he said, you should have your say. And really, they should have a hearing about it. You know, just have not a discipline hearing, but just talk to you about it, and then say, no, we're not happy, and we're not accepting it. So I ended up, I battled it sort of through the year. They agreed, once they sort of realised that I was serious about keeping it, they agreed that they would let me race till the end of the year. And what happened then was, I wrote letters through my club to my league to everybody in the sport saying, look, if you want to see this, be in a position to vote. You know, get your head together. Do you want it or don't you? We wrote 88 letters through the year. I think 4 letters went out to 22 leagues, basically. Anyway, the fact of the matter was that it came to the AGM, and I forced a vote at the AGM under any other business, because you can ask the question, and when the question was asked, everybody voted on it, and they voted to keep it, and so we ended up with it in. And I think it was a good thing. You know, I make no apologies for doing it. I think it's allowed a lot of people to go racing with a big power car. In those days, everybody used bog standard engines, and the engines were 400 quid. Now, granted, now the engines are $4,000 and they're tuning them and all the rest of it, I know. But in Class 10, you can get away with 2 750s. I had 2 750s in last year. Yeah. You know, they're not as powerful as the big power cars, but the car was quick enough. You know, we're spinning 100 horsepower away. So for me, you still don't necessarily need to be spending thousands and thousands of pounds on them. And it's still probably cheap racing compared to some other sports. But there is space for cheap racing still in the sport. You know, that you've got to have some cheaper classes. You can't all be Class 7s, 8s, 10s. You know, not everybody's got the budget to do that. So we've got to cater for everybody. And that's quite a difficult thing. It's quite a difficult thing because people will spend money, and they always have spent money. Barry Glendenning with that Cosworth GA. I mean, going back to 1984 and 5, they had GA Cosworth in a bloody special. A company built it. Martin Sports Cars built him his chassis. You know, it was a proper built chassis. It wasn't something thrown together. It was a proper piece of kit. So yeah, Illingworth. You know, he had a proper. It was the lad from Tenby that had the 8. You know, the loads of them are big money cars like.
Yeah, the name which always stood out to me back from those days was Roger Bound.
Yeah.
I mean, people back then was actually using modified Formula Ford, Formula 3 chassis, then big fancy Cosworth engine, BDA gearbox, BDA engine, sorry, or Cosworth, Hewland gearbox. That have fancy exhaust systems all chromed up, and then the best suspension available at the time. The only cheap thing on the car was the tyres, because tyres were pretty much, they were just off-road tyres back then. So I mean, there were some seriously expensive cars, and as you say, people spent money then. You had quite a fairly decent way into the sport, really, because you managed to do things on a cheaper budget. But people out there did spend whatever they wanted, and that's what happens now. It's just that if people want to go faster, you have got to spend some money, unfortunately. But that's just the natural progression of things. Excuse me.
Yeah. And that first class I built cost me 1,200 quid.
Yeah.
1,200 quid built a full car, and I had a pair of rear tyres on it for the Nationals at probably 15 quid a piece in them days. You know, that was proper cheap racing, and we raced every weekend. I wasn't like some superstar and thinking I was just going to do qualifiers and that was it. We were out every weekend. I did 33 meetings the year before. 2019, I did 33 meetings. You know, that's a lot of racing. You know, I still believe that we go racing. You know, I'm in this sport to go racing, not to sit around and do now. You know, not a big bay tent man, not bothered. You know, I'm quite happy sitting in my camper and watch a bit of telly. I like racing. You know, and it's what we were brought up with. We used to get some serious racing. You know, we start at 12 o'clock at Scarborough, finish at 4, and you'd had like your class racing, some first 10s, 20s at line, front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, and specials opens. I mean, there was just races going on all the time. You know, I don't know what's happened. It's sort of, I don't think there's more people racing because there's less. When you look at the members' numbers, there's less. I think the class racing is a major sort of problem with it because we just do like men's, ladies, 3 heats and that's it, or 2 heats and a final and that's it. You know, whereas I like to have 5 races. You know, if I go to Scarborough, I can have 5 races in the day. And if you go with 2 cars, you're knackered because you've been that much at it. They're that well organised. The pits crew at Scarborough are phenomenal. You know, Mike Barrett came and his missus and they had a new car. And he came in 2019 and he couldn't believe it. He said, I've had 9 races today. I've never had 9 races. You know, but that's what it used to be like years ago. You just got loads of racing. Somehow we've sort of got sidetracked with it. You know, I had a meeting in 2019, I think. I went to Scunthorpe and for some reason it was a quiet meeting and there was me and Diesel Dan and he had his class 5, I had the class 3. And so we raced each other. There was 2 of us. We raced each other, three races, side by side, never touched paint, absolutely had a whale of a weekend. You know, with 3 cracking races, inches apart, with a 5 and a 3. Now, you could nearly mix them. You know, I know people don't like mixing them, but in the old days, we used to mix them, and we used to get more racing. You know, if you've 4 cars on a grid, that's only 4 out of your 160 that are racing. You can put 20 out there, everybody's going to go, aren't they? You know, there's less numbers of races, but more people involved. That's, you know, that's all I'm saying. You know, your class 1s and class 2s could go, and you could start your class 1s off on a flag and start the 2s off on the start line with the bungee 5 seconds later and let them race because you're getting more people going around and there's more for spectators to watch. You know, so, I'd race. I mean, I'll race anybody. You know, let's have a go.
Yeah, I mean, what one enjoyable meeting I think, which actually happened at Scunny's track, was when White Rose did the Rose Bowl because the Saturday was just a fun day where there was enough class 1s and 2s to run separately, but I think 3s and 5s or 3s, 5s, 7s went together. I think it was, and things like that.
Yeah,
and that's sort of why, which we won't come on tonight, but we will another time. That's why I always found the Fastest Man on Grass meeting such a valuable meeting to me, because I mean, there's nothing more exciting about those knockout stages in the Fastest Saloon and Special Race. And like I say, we will talk about that another time. But yeah, that was again changing. When I was in class 9, the frustrating thing was going to a club meeting and maybe only 2 class 9s on the day. Put me with class 10s, put me with class 8s. I'd rather race a full grid of cars. I don't care what class they are. But I'd like to be in a full grid. I don't want to feel like I'm wasting my time and by only racing 1 or 2 other cars. And this is the thing. You've got to think about the drivers, because if you could. That meeting where at Scunny with just you and Diesel Dan, you both might have gone home at the end of it thinking, well, I didn't really have anybody else to race against today because I knew my car was faster than Diesel's. Or Diesel might have said, well, I knew I was going to win on a polished track because my car's nimbler. You both might have gone home and thought, oh, I'm not going to gut at next meeting because I had nobody to race against. And then we've lost 2 cars through the gate. So there is a scope.
Me and Diesel spoke afterwards, and we both had a whale of a day. You know, we've spoken since. You know, that was a good day. I wouldn't mind doing that again. And people came up to us in the pits and said, "There's only 2 of you, but bloody hell, we were neck and neck for the finish every time. It was that close. It was nip and tuck. Absolutely brilliant. Really, really good fun. But a bit of respect. Two old blokes. A bit of respect for each other. We're here to race. We're not here to knock 7 bells out of each other with the bodywork. And we didn't. And he said to me, did Patrick? He said, I knew when I turned into first bend, you wouldn't come slapping into me. I had to go around outside of him, and then you drive up the inside of the next bend. And it's proper racing. You don't often get a good race like that. And because the two different characteristics of the cars, you've got to sort of drive a bit different as well. You're right about the Class 9 and being the only one there. And Scarborough's only a little club. But when we were there in 2019, when we last sort of raced, there was me and my 2 lads in F600s. We had another F600 lad there. We had Aspinall, the lad Jasper Aspinall was there with a 10 with a Chevy in. Who else did? A couple of lads with Class 8s. So we went straight line starts, a bit like fastest man on grass.
Yeah.
4 completely different classes of car, and actually I was coming seconds and thirds. Jasper, I'd pass him if he went wide. He couldn't leave. He had more power. The 8s had more power. But if they left an inch, you were through. And the racing was just tremendous. And you were absolutely on it. You were buzzing. And because you're in a 600cc car and you're a big, heavy bloke, you're trying. You're having to drag the wheels off it. And that's part of it, isn't it? That's the beauty of it. You said any racing is good. But when you have a day like that, and I'd come away from Scarborough actually giggling, absolutely giggling, just because we've had some good racing, But it's all there for us to have a go, and hopefully we won't be long before we get a crack on shortly.
Yeah, but that's what racing's about. It doesn't always matter if you win. You want to go racing on a Saturday or a Sunday, and you want to go home buzzing because you've had a good day and you want to go again.
Yeah.
You don't want to come home from a meeting thinking, well, I've used a bit of petrol today, and that's about it. Just going round. You want to have enjoyed it, and there's nothing more frustrating all round than just seeing a 3-car race where not much happens. You want to see car racing. You want to see people enjoying it. We're going to get on to. Well, going back to the twin engine route, we sort of went off topic, didn't we? But obviously, it revolutionised Class 7 and 10. It had a short lifespan in Class 9. The twin engine, I think it went for 3 years, 95 to 97. That was it. But it would obviously revolutionise 7s and 10s, and. Yeah, it's hard to imagine what the classes would be like today if it didn't happen, because you did that and you proved that an alternative could work, but a cheaper alternative as well. Yes, it has grown because that's progression, and people obviously want to tune engines and make them faster. But you originally set out to prove that this is a route which isn't too complicated, despite it possibly looking complicated by trying 2 motors, but you showed that something was doable. But I know you can still run Chevys, and you could run a V6 if you wish. Not that they happen anymore, but where do you reckon it would have happened eventually anyway, or what? How would you have envisioned the class would have gone if you hadn't have done that?
Good question. I mean, I think probably if twin engines hadn't happened, you might have ended up with a lot of Chevys in it, just purely for sort of pound per horsepower. The crate engines that I'm using in the 3 took $5,000 for 500 horse. You can't buy that sort of power really. And I mean, it would evolve. I mean, everything evolves. The fact that I sort of built a twin engine car or 2 and they took off. I suppose it's just happened now, and you'll never know what would have happened. But I still think there's a path for different engines in the class. I wouldn't be put off putting it. Well, Sam Gould's built one, hasn't he? With a V6 jack. There are people out there you've probably got to have a dad like Sam's got, who's good with engines, to be able to do that. That probably, and people will probably stand back and watch. If you look at Andy Oldby and the lads with all the V8 sort of radicals and variants there, they're all right. Andy's had his problems with that. That wasn't an instant success, and he's worked hard on that car, as have other people. Phil Cooper's got the V8 that was John Gay's, and he says it's got too much power, so you've got to drive them. You get all this power, it's all right having power, but how the hell do you put it down? So you can make a thing too Larry, really. So there probably is a room for a change. I mean, if I was going to build a 7, I'd probably use one of the modern Fords, the what was it called? The turbo one that make a hell of a lot of noise. The EcoBoost, tiny little engines. Have you seen one? Tiny.
Yeah, they are small, but you get a good 400 horsepower, don't you?
Sorry?
You get a good couple hundred horsepower before you start doing anything with them, really.
Oh yeah, if you turbo them properly, you can get up to 400 horse out of them. Because I've looked at them and thought, you know what? Build a real light little car. You could have a neat, tidy little car engine car for a lot less money than 2 Hayabusa's nowadays. This is one of the things I like about, or try to do, is take something that's hardly modified engine-wise. So the 2 bike engines, the idea was that they were standard engines. If you blow one, you just put a standard engine in. And that went on for a long time. It still does. I mean, I've got 2 engines now. I've sold me 10, and I'm going to build another one. I've got 2. Well, I've actually got 4 engines. I've got either 2 Honda Fireblade 1000s out of a British Superbike team, like spare engines from them, and I've got 2 ZX10 engines. So they're all 190 horse apiece, box standard. They'll run and rev and go. You don't need any more power than that. Not in a special. Certainly not in a special. And they're not a lot of money. If you're building them and you build them on a chain drive, you shouldn't be spending a fortune building a 10. Realistically. That's a good thing. If you blow an engine up, a base engine, I paid 870 quid for a 16-plate engine. It's like brand new for the bare engine. Well, 870 quid, you can stand it. But if it's 10 grand for your tuned engine, or 20 grand, or God forbid you blew one of them V8s radicals, it could be like, oh, you'll remortgage the house, haven't you? So I know when I was circuit racing, I had a really highly tuned turboed Hayabusa engine, and I hated it because I was scared of blowing it up. That was the problem. I couldn't thrash it. I was changing gear early, just weren't getting that buzz. Whereas the standard engine, it didn't matter. So there is a bit of psychology in it, I suppose. Some folks will throw money at it and not bothered, but I'm not like that.
Yeah. While you've been talking, I've been trying to think, really, and I just wonder if maybe 7s could have ended up just being a Class 8 with a body shell. But they'd have been for a bigger booster or another higher CC'd bike engine. Class 10, I'm a bit unsure. Maybe obviously they would have just carried on with the V8 route, with the Chevys and that. V60s might have lasted a little bit longer, but they started to become less and less in road cars, weren't they? So the V6s. So, but I think it's intriguing seeing stuff like Jaguar engines being used and that. Like what Sam's got, but it could be interesting to see what happens in the future. Obviously, car engines has come back, not just the V8s, but the 4 cylinders, supercharged, turboed. There is a lot of scope out there and a lot of possibilities. So that is one exciting thing, I suppose, for what the class could be. But just a final point before we close on part 1, as it's going to be, because we've still got a lot to discuss, and we're already over 2 hours in. So I don't think we're going to get it all done in one night. So we're sort of going to wind down-ish on your Class 8 career, because you would return to Class 8 late 90s, very early 2000s. You would have some success again, which which we'll talk about next time. But just as a viewpoint for yourself, you was in Class 8 near the beginning of the 90s, 93, and you sort of ended almost a decade later before you went to talk about something else, which we'll start on our next chat. How did you see the progression of Class 8 itself from when you first started in it to how you sort of left it in around 2000, 2001?
Yeah, well, I suppose when I started, the engine was in front of the drive, a bit like an F600 is now. You know, it was just a dead simple sort of rig. And then I got the idea to turn the engine around to get more weight further back. So I spun the engine around, literally got 2 cogs out of an engineer's book, just ordered them. They were only soft, they weren't very hardened or anything. And I made the chain adjuster bar and just meshed the 2 cogs together and dripped oil on from an oil drifter. That raced. I took it to Scarborough for the first meeting, and Jim Snowden scrutinised the car, stuck his head in the back of it and went, "I want one of these." And I sold one. When I scrutinised, he had one. He had one of the first wrong way around. He had a Blackbird engine in it. And I sold him a car without even trying. But it was successful straight away. So then we had the wrong way around engines. And then obviously we put them the right way around and drove them forwards on a chain and sprockets. They've been in just about every which way you can think of the bike engines once. Jeff Beresford was sort of fairly heavily involved early on with the drive boxes. Because, to be fair, he has more engineering equipment and that, and he's an excellent engineer. He's a clever fella in his own right. But if you went to him with an idea, he'd say, "Yeah, I can do that," and you'd literally give him the bits and a bit of an idea, and he'd come up with the goods. You know, so it worked well, did that really? You know, even though we were rivals at times on the track, and in business, you know, I suppose in business we were rivals, but we always had this respect for each other that, you know, look, we'll make this, we'll do that. In fact, the funny thing, Jeff Beresford used to make racks, steering racks, and by definition they were pretty crude because the value of a rack was only 60 quid or whatever in them days. And so he was making them, he was just banging them out. But Norman Kidd, I got him, when I first started building cars in 93, I said, "We need to make a proper steering rack, Norman." And he said, "Oh, I could build racks. I could make a few quid." I said, "You can, I'll sell them, you make them." So he set on to make these racks. I don't know if you've ever seen a Norman Kidd steering rack, but they're beautiful. Absolutely. Oh man, they were works of art. He used to mess on with them for hours. But when I first started selling them, I remember walking across the pits at South Wales Open, and I walked towards Terry Brown, Bruce Campbell, and Dickie Lindsay, and they were in a group. And I had a rack in my hand, and I held it level, and I tipped it sideways, and Beresford was stood nearby. And as I tipped it sideways, it just went and rolled through. And he used to push the old racks, they were tight as hell. And then I tipped it the other way, and it rolled through. And like just real steady, just rolled beautiful the way. And I paddled up, and I said to Dickie Lindsay and them, I said, "Hey, look at these racks. These are quality, these are. What do you reckon?" "Bloody hell, they're mint." And Jeff paddled up, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Here are these, they're 150 quid. They had to be 150 quid, you wouldn't make money." He said, "Thank you very much." I said, "Why?" He said, "Now I can make a proper rack. I've been fighting the fact that people won't pay 80 quid for them." And you know, and I set a different benchmark for him, but it allowed him then, I mean, he sold hundreds of racks, lots more than we ever did, you know, but it allowed him to get that the market came to him then where he could make a better rack. So, you know, it's funny how things go around and you know, it develops, I suppose it develops the whole sport. You know, if you look at Russ Shepherd, John Gay, these lads were around building an odd car early on. Russ Shepherd and John Gay, I mean, they're stunning cars. These cars that they're being now are second to none. They'd stand in a Formula One paddock. You know, nobody can turn the nose for the quality of the cars. And to be part of that process where, because I started off and I built a lot of cars that were dirt cheap. They weren't expensive cars. I was making a living at them, wasn't making a fortune, but it allowed other people to come in and then raise the standard higher and higher and higher, where now they make a living out of them. You know, Russ certainly makes a living out of it. But I look at that new car that Jade's got, and it's stunning. Absolutely, every detail on it's, you know, impeccable. And I mean, that's just one. I mean, Graham Bennett's churning cars out left, right, and centre. You know, there's people now actually making a living at it because of the development that's gone on. You know, and without that development, there wouldn't be the racing that there is now. You know, all the tackle's pretty good. Don't matter whose car it is. It's all pretty good tackle. It's reliable. You can get the spares. You know, for a man who's an accountant or a dentist or, you know, a wagon driver, he hasn't time to be building a car. He wants to literally ring Russ or Graham or whoever and say, "Can you send me some English funds? Thank you very much. Bang. Here's my credit card." And that's what's happened. You know, to be part of that early on is quite good. You know, and I'm sort of quite proud of that, really, I suppose, because, you know, without that input, where would we be now? You know, where would the job be? There's things that probably we've lost over the years, but we've gained other things. So, you know, the tracks are certainly better. The track construction's better. The equipment's better. We understand track watering better. You know, people always moan about the water carts, but, you know, you go back to some of them 1989 Nationals video, there's dust everywhere.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
If you're at the back, you can't where you're going. You know, and that was a Nationals final. Jesus Christ. So the job has come on massively. And I hope it still does. You know, I hope we survive. We've had a hard year. It's going to be tough for some of the smaller clubs. You know, I worry about that. I think everybody does probably, but we'll have to just muck in and see if we can get it back going again, really.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this is the thing which some people have griped about, like especially like with the fickle thing of licenses. People have been put off buying licenses last year because of obviously the year it was, and people are still put off from getting one this year, even though the plans are in place to go racing. But don't forget, last year, all those clubs who committed to a season had committed through their landowners, landlords, whoever, and they've still had to pay rent to stop those venues being turned into ploughed fields for crop or for livestock. So they've had outgoings, and they've had absolutely zero income. Some of the clubs which didn't run last year. So the easiest way for them to get some funding back in is by buying a license, and what we want to do. And if people will support the clubs, then they're going to survive a bit longer than what they could do if they don't get that help and support. So but it's promising at the moment, but the problem is it's the progression through the world is out of our hands, because we need everybody to behave and stick to the rules and procedures and everything in place on a Monday to Friday, so then we can go away and enjoy a weekend. So that's what we need to happen. But it's good that you've said that you were proud of what you'd achieved through Z Cars, because it did sort of happen by accident. You was fully committed to your life and your job profession, and in the end, by people coming to you and not you actually broadcasting yourself too much and going out there saying, "Look, I want to build cars, come and buy them off me." You had people coming to you saying, "I like what you're doing. Can you help me and build me a car so I can go racing?" Changed your life, and as you've said more than once, it's something you wouldn't have changed for the world, because it's made you who you are, and it's made you enjoy this sport, which has captivated you since the early 80s. So it's good that you're proud of it and that you're still enjoying every moment of it. But I think we've got to an ideal point there. We've sort of got to the end of the 90s, the early parts of the 2000s. So I think that is an ideal point to sort of stop where we are, and we're going to continue on another time, because I've still got a page and a half written down here, and I've still got more to do because I never got to the end of it. So I hope that's okay for you, and we can definitely come back in a few days time, and we'll continue with this, because I think there's quite a lot to digest there, because so much has you've experienced, you've enjoyed. There's been many moments at different levels, and I think that we've certainly got plenty more to go.
Good stuff. That'll do. Yeah, we'll rejoin shortly.
Yeah, we will. We will. But yeah, we're at 10:30. We've done just shy of 2.5 hours. So I think yeah, we've done well. And like I say, there's been so much I've learned about your early stages, which, like how you met Mike Holtley originally. Actually, a bit of a prank by you sort of cheekily enforcing your powers just to find out where this Autograss racing was taking place. The story with the and the donkey, which I won't forget now. I didn't ask you any more about the rabbit story because you covered it by. When I saw it, I thought, rabbit, what on earth is he on about? He wasn't a rabbit hunter as well, was he, while he was going about? But no, it's the fact that you took the time out between your racing to enjoy it and enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
And the fact that it made it comical and fun for others makes it even better. So, Chris, I can't say thank you enough for what we've talked about so far, and I can't wait to do the next part. I'm sure there's many more stories, many more memories to relive, and we'll see what your thoughts are on the next stages of your Autograss life. But yeah, again, thank you for taking the time out. We'll end it there, and we'll come back in a few days' time. So, Chris, thank you again. Russ from GrassChat here. When you get to watch this, you're going to enjoy it. So I don't even know why I'm saying it at the end, because I've enjoyed every second of it, and look forward to it again. So we'll see you on the next one.
Brilliant. Thank you.